I think Project Management 0.5 is here for a particular reason. We came to the conclusion we can try to implement everything rock solid in our approach. And yes, I am a PMP certified as well as Tarek is. But we came to the conclusion, are we not overcomplicating our process to a maximum extent? How can we make sure that in project management you also allow still for changes? And what is the basis? Is the basis Project Management 2.0 or is actually the new approach for Project Management 0.5? And that's where actually our journey started by saying we're here at Philips, from Philips, and although I have to say in Philips we are excellent in creating the best processes in the world, we are also very well aware that in project management you have to make sure that you still think from a bigger perspective, and you have to make sure what are we here for in order to make sure that we bring the best propositions and product to market. In shaving, which is actually our core discipline, we don't talk shavers anymore, but we talk healthy skin. The mindset has not changed. We want to make sure that we bring the best products in market. But what has changed is the mental model. These guys are all PMP certified, so we did that in 2015, and there's nothing wrong with PMBOK. But there is more to it, and that is what we actually are going to show here. So Chris already told about Agile. We're even making a next leap, and be surprised that in Philips we embrace new ways of working in order to make sure that we are in the health solutions area being successful. So this is the most busiest slide with text, but it's just the jump into what is the starting point for actually trying to see if there's anything else for us, helping us in the journey on making sure that we get into development of challenging propositions which just ask more than the hardware and our waterfall approach. Philips is into personalized proposition, and which actually means I want to bring something specifically for you which helps you and is not just an eenheidsworst, as I say it in Dutch, unity sausage, if I try to, to explain. We are into personalized proposition solutions. That means where we started 75 years ago on our journey of shavers with Mr. Anton Horowitz, who says, there is a motor, there is a cord, and there's one shaving cap, and you put it to your face, and we solve your beard. But that could not actually be the entire need for that specific consumer, because nowadays we have the millennials who say, I have a pimple, or I have a dent, or I have somewhere a wrinkle in my face, I need to have something special for me. I have long hairs, I have fluffy hairs, I would like to have something which is dedicated for me. And that is something which is quite different. So the unity sausage is gone, and we have to make sure that we actually are learning from the consumers out there what we need to do. And from project management perspective, that means actually if you start somewhere on a journey, you think, I know my consumer, and I just make the race 1.5 years from now fully launched in market, you might come to the conclusion that it's not working that way. Because we are changing so rapidly over time, and you might say, shavers changing rapidly? Yes, because yesterday shavers, tomorrow it's healthy skin, and the day after tomorrow we talk about skin treatments, skin curing actually, all the way from starting with 500 engineers in Drachten and in Amsterdam and talking about healthy skin. The project leaders, nowadays we have about 3,000 project leaders within Philips. And you could say at 110,000 employees that's not much, but all these kind of project leaders are facing the same thing. Whether you're in MRI, whether you're in Healthtech, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in healthy living, Philips nowadays also still has coffee. So everything around it is making sure that you get it into your relevant propositions. So key for us is, yes, continuous learning. That's also what you do with Agile, but very important, how can we make sure that you learn, learn, learn? And for that, the magic term is connected propositions. If you talk about these connected propositions, you see that we're trying to understand what the consumer needs. And we somehow have to make sure that when you think I have that starting point as a project, which we call the value proposition worksheet in Philips, and you start with that value proposition worksheet and you make it into an ideal product model, and you make it into a frozen concept, and from that you make it into a starting condition for doing mass production, and you do your verification and validation, you might come to the conclusion you're actually not serving him, in this case, to a maximum extent. And by connected propositions, we actually can not only understand the consumer after he's having the product, but we can already understand the consumer when he's having that product. So this is the project actually of Tarek. And you see already in blue the very important acronyms which turn up, which also Chris was using: pivot or turn, or pivot or persevere. And actually with those connected propositions, and that is the bridge I want you to keep in mind, we come to the conclusion that we are learning during actually project execution. My biggest challenge as PMO, Project Management Officer in Philips, was actually managing the amount of RTCs, request to change, which was coming our way during project management. If you want to make sure that in the end the proposition is right, we have to pivot and turn in our projects. And waterfall was not the most successful approach for us for that. Our market is unpredictable. That could of course be an excuse by saying I have to stop doing business, but I think it's very more valuable is that you could be in a potential market where you could have an opportunity, but we do not know exactly how the market is changing over time. Unplanned budget increase due to change request is inevitable. I just talked to you about 10% of my budget was on RTCs, making sure that we change during the project life cycle into the new propositions. Scope change after frozen design is complex to handle. So all these things were not helping us to the maximum extent. Philips would not have been Philips if we have not said we have a solution for the waterfall approach. We have teams who are really into these kind of improvements. We call them process improvement teams, and they helped us in trying to develop all kinds of stepstones, interfaces. We talked about V models, everything to make sure that we got into that waterfall funnel and we manage everything which goes around it. Very helpful, but we could still say not efficient to the maximum extent. So this is the journey we took as a team in the last 4 years actually, in trying to see how can we make sure that we manage everything which is coming new to us. What have we done? And then the first one is fully recognized. That's the hardware approach, and you just go read from left to right and you come with a product. Where we also came to the conclusion it will not always be right when you see that your market need is changing and your consumers are actually having a different need or business need. So hardware, PMBOK works if you know what you're doing and it's fully secured. Software, great what Chris mentioned, and yes, we embrace it as well, so we do the safe approach. We had the Scrum Masters, we have everything in place, but it only works for us in the software domain. What we tried to do within Philips was line number 3, where we said, okay, but now we have these digital connected platforms where I do have an appliance with a cord, where I do have something which is called software in the shaver. Shaver is extremely complex nowadays. It has the same kind of software as a motor engine. And of course, we do have the app in order to make sure that we can do the communication. We called it a hybrid model. Chris said it was agile, but we call it hybrid. That model also works, but what we actually still came to the conclusion, it is a mix of best and both worlds, but it still has the restriction of how to handle changes, how to be able to do pivot and turns and make sure that you, without loss of efficiency, still could bring and tune the proposition to the desired extent. And that's what we call minimum viable product. So you could say, oh, there is more than waterfall and agile and lean development and DFSS. Yes, we call it minimum viable product. The millennials immediately came with a nice translation to that acronym, MVP. They said, Richard, does that allow me to actually do maximum violation of processes? I said, no, that's not it. MVP is not maximum violation of processes. Actually, MVP is all about making sure that it's not about project management of a series of knowns. It is actually facing a series of unknowns. And as project leader, that might be a challenge. Project leaders, we said, we are the ones who are actually embracing the risks, and we do proper risk management. What we are doing, we are managing actually what the outcome should be, not what the output should be. So we don't manage deliverables, we manage the outcome in order to solve the risks. And then we said, we have to right away develop a proposition which is first time right. We don't want to change the proposition, we want to be first time right. And for that reason, MVP, we said, the consumer is first, it's a consumer-centric approach. You start from the holistic approach of the consumer, and then you're actually drilling it down to a very simple set of steps in order to make it.
Basically, I'm just going to try to walk you through the MVP approach. I think you all are familiar with it. You probably have been using it in your projects, for some of you. But basically, it is about three main steps: creating your value proposition, executing, and managing the execution. It is all about the consumer in mind, so not outputs, but outcomes. And it is about first creating your vision or idea. Then you see if with that idea actually, is there a problem-solution fit? Am I solving something, or am I just working for the sake of working? Then you try to ideate. You come up with already with some prototypes and so on. And then you see whether via testing, continuous testing, whether what you have brought, does that actually bring value to the consumer, yes or no? Based on that, you iterate that loop until you get to a certain maturity. At that point, you are good enough, you're MVP. And afterwards, you're actually just able to scale up, so building a commercial proposition. You will see a slight difference between the first value proposition creation step and the execution, in a simple way that when you're creating a value proposition and you're testing it with your consumers, they're probably, the idea is interesting. Am I going to put money for that? Probably no. That's actually the verge where you move to the commercial or the scale phase. And afterwards, the managing phase, some people call it the easy phase, because what you do is that you just keep on improving your existing proposition. But sometimes it's actually the most difficult, especially from an organizational perspective, because that's where usually you lose focus. You say, I'm good, my business is doing all right, it should be fine. That's actually where you have your own mistake, because you should really keep on continuous improvement. And you will see actually that there are a lot of commonalities with Waterfall, with Agile, MVP. And I think Richard already mentioned it, but also Chris. It's not about what is right and what is wrong. It's just about choosing for yourself, depending on your situation, what would work for you, and trying to build your own model in the end. It has been a roller coaster actually for us, and so is the graph below. But basically what you do is that when you create your value proposition, at least the recommendation that I would always give is to keep your consumer involved since the beginning. You will start testing a concept, and I fully understand that in the industry it's a little bit difficult to build, let's say, prototypes so early in the project, but I'll come to that. It doesn't have to be a prototype, especially at that phase when you're still building a concept. Testing a concept is also fine. Then, once you have done that, you will go into what we call build, measure, learn loops. And these are nothing else than continuous improvement. So you will keep improving and maturing your proposition over and over again. Every time you have an iteration, you test it with relevant consumers, with your target group, and you improve it. And that mindset is very key for this, at least for this way of working. Afterwards, when you're good enough, when you're commercially ready, you can scale it up and manage it, as I mentioned earlier. It is about creating that mindset that will allow you over time to be business agile and also be able to come up with quick ideas and test them very quickly. The riskiest hypothesis being validated first at a very early stage, because this will allow you to further on go into that loop over and over again and actually improving your proposition. Another key moment for me at least was that especially when you have the chance to observe consumers, also customers for some, actually going through your experience. That's, for me, the key moment where you get valuable learnings about what they actually do, how do they actually use your product, what do they think, what do they feel. And there are, of course, some tools to capture that, which I'll get to in a bit. This is, for me, the greatest tool, at least that I have used, in order to capture my whole proposition. So at the very beginning, at the very early stage, I wanted to know, what is my source of business? Who is my customer or my consumer? How am I going actually to channelize my products, and so on and so forth? Your hypothesis backlog, as I mentioned already, very important. Just try to list all the hypotheses that you have. And I think it's a very painful exercise at the beginning, because you have just so many unknowns, if only they were knowns. You have so many unknowns at that time that you would like just to list them and try to validate one at a time. The riskiest first, and go through that list. It will also allow you to actually increase or add new hypotheses that come along the way. You can actually just have a consumer confrontation, and that's just a simple interview. If you have the chance to do that, that's the most valuable thing, at least for me. It's already about verifying your proposition, also called prototyping, and I know that in the industry it's very difficult to do so. I think the explainer videos, you probably have seen tons of them. The most famous one is, at least for me, was on Dropbox, where they just explain what the concept is, how it works, and so on, and you see if it triggers consumers, yes or no. You also have all kind of concierge. You can also actually just combine and explain in video with a landing page. A landing page is nothing else than just to check if people convert into your proposition, yes or no, if there is a certain interest. And you can also go as big as a pilot. In the end, it's also about, I'll leave you with this, your desire to change must be higher than your desire to stay the same. We as Philips are called project leaders, but most importantly, integral project leaders, because we're managing the whole end-to-end value chain. But I think we shouldn't be IPLs, integral project leaders. We should be IPLs, ideal proposition leaders.